Well, Isaac, it's good to have you come in and chat with us a little bit today. You do a lot of different things here at Cicero, but I know particularly today's discussion, we're going to talk a little bit about AI. I know it's super buzzy, but it is also revolutionary. I mean, I use it in my regular workflow all the time, and it is going to have massive impact. I think that folks, there are some folks who are maybe more senior or not sure if it's going to be a fad or if it's really going to impact things and how. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, which I'm excited about. But let's just first start with a little bit about who you are, your background. What do you do here at Cicero?
Yeah, great, Chase. I'm excited to be here too. So I am an engagement manager at Cicero. Been at Cicero for almost 6 years now. 6 years come September, crazy. I also was at Cicero as the finance and operations lead. So I oversaw the finance operations for about 4 or 5 years. Moved on to consulting. That's the position I'm in now. Before that, I did a slew of different things. I did have a small technical background. I did some data science pieces, and that really actually got me into the passion of AI when it started really hitting the market. So kind of dabbled in it for a little while, pretty passionate about it, pretty passionate about what it can do. And it's exciting, and everyone should be using it in some form.
Well, let's just start there. I'm a little curious why you think everybody should be using it in some form, and I think across verticals in any given business it could vary quite a bit, right? So why and where? How do we get started? What should I be doing in my role? Maybe narrow it a little bit to talk about what form is easy for businesses to start incorporating AI?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think in a general sense, not getting industry specific, there's a phrase I like to use, which is practicing at the top of your license. It's used specifically within healthcare, but I think it applies across the landscape, which says everybody in their day-to-day work life does some sort of administrative task. That's not what they went to school for, it's not what they specialized in, it's not what they're really good at, but it just has to be done, right? Yeah. Drafting emails, writing notes, writing memos, all of the things that I think are different across industry, but many of us do. And so what AI allows us to do is take those monotonous tasks and turn those over to a machine, which gives us more time to practice what we're actually good at or what we studied or what we did. So across the industry, if you're not using it, I would venture to say that means you don't have administrative tasks, which I would doubt. I think up to the highest CEO level down to the lowest level, everybody's doing some sort of administrative task. So I think that's by far and away when people come to me and they say, or when we go to different companies and do different seminars, they say, hey, how should we be using this? What are you using this for? Just think of what you're doing on a daily that you hate doing and see if you can somehow make AI do it.
Right. Well, and I think the example that I can think of, the first time I saw this before even ChatGPT came out, was when Gmail introduced the autocomplete, right, with phrasing.
Yeah.
And 9 out of 10 times it was usually pretty accurate, especially in like a workplace setting where you kind of have pretty consistent themes of how you respond to people. And so I think that the way that I've seen it used and how I think about it too, it's almost like having a staffer. It's like having somebody who's on your staff now that can it do the really in-depth strategic thinking that's kind of really custom to what you're doing? No. But can it help make connections on first rounds of things or some of the, like you're saying, monotonous tasks that can often fill too much of a day? And so I've seen that even in my own workflow be quite effective. But I'm a little curious about, because I know that we're working with companies in at least a couple specific instances, talking maybe within healthcare a little bit, where I think healthcare could be revolutionized very quickly. You think of how complex these healthcare systems are, and when simple monotonous tasks could be made more efficient, the compounding effect there could be great. So maybe talk a little bit, I know you've done some work within healthcare in this, and so talk about AI and
healthcare is an interesting an interesting place, and the company that we've done a lot of work for is also in the education space, and both education and healthcare historically lag in all technology adoption by 5 to 10 years. Interesting that the company that's doing it sits in both of those, and so as you think about AI in healthcare, AI in education, a lot of the discussion actually goes to this idea of staff augmentation, right? And there's a framework I like to use when specifically thinking of, hey, is AI going to take my job? It's a huge question in healthcare, right? Huge question in education. And so on the framework it has, two sides. One is, the consequences of an action. And then on the other side is, excuse me, I forgot.
Well, and this is in specific roles, right? Like, are you thinking specific roles when evaluating, like, is this going to take a job?
So specific roles, sure, but the framework stands to be the same, which is, hey, how consequential are the actions it's going to make, and then how difficult is it to make those actions. So as you climb up the scale, and you think of how consequential these actions are going to make, it actually drives more to the human side of, hey, let's actually let humans decide, make these decisions, versus if it's inconsequential, then you lean more towards the machine learning. And then you find a middle, which is the staff augmentation piece. And the reason I bring that up in healthcare, there are a lot of decisions being made that are very consequential. You're dealing with people's health, you're dealing with people's lives. And so handing that fully over to machine is not something that's happened, it's something that's sketchy. And so you think of a couple different roles within healthcare specifically. There's healthcare administrators, or there's what's called like coders, who take transcripts of doctors and they code in what actually doctors are saying to bill patients. Or bill insurances. So much of that actually has some pretty big consequences. And so that's part of the reason they're not moving over to AI, and part of the reason that in the next 5 to 10 years you don't see this big displacement happening of this role, but really an augmentation. And that's really what we tell clients that bring this up is, hey, it's not displacement you have to worry about right now. Now, there are roles that will probably be displaced in the next few years, but just think of it as the more consequential the decisions are, the less opportunity there is for actual displacement, and you're more going on this staff augmentation journey.
Well, and I wonder, as I was thinking about the impacts of this, because I personally believe in innovation moving humanity forward, honestly, and the impact that I most immediately thought was I could see this really affecting junior roles, like just out of school, right? Because if I'm already treating it kind of like I already have a staff member in much quicker response and way less cost, I could see how it becomes really challenging for folks who don't have that experience under their belts, now needing to figure out, how do I remain competitive? I wonder, as you're talking about displacement, does this tool, in your opinion, really force those young people to be competitive within using the tools themselves, or do you think they need to be competitive in other ways?
Yes, I think it's the tools. I think a famous saying is AI is not going to displace jobs, those who know how to use AI will. 100% agree with that. And what's really interesting is we talk to these big companies, you're talking $200, $300 million in revenue companies, thousands of employees. One thing that's actually really lacking is this kind of standardized approach to AI upskilling. And I think there's a couple reasons around that. There's still kind of a stigma of using tools such as ChatGPT. You'll notice that if you tell someone that you wrote something with ChatGPT versus tell them you wrote it yourself, there's much more scrutiny on the one that was written by ChatGPT, which is, oh, this sounds like it was written by AI, right? However, if I wouldn't have told you, you would never have known.
Right.
And so that's actually a pretty big barrier within companies of sharing how people are using it. Even within Cicero, I don't necessarily hear a ton of sharing about how people are using it on a daily basis. I try to go out of my way to share different ways. But again, taking these big companies and creating this standardized approach to, this is how we treat AI, this is how we're going to upskill our employees, everyone should be using it, just isn't happening. And I think it will start to happen, but I think there's also just so much information out there that companies just don't necessarily know where to start.
Right.
And my advice is just start with ChatGPT. There's a lot of tools out there. We don't need to complicate this. There's, people are using different tools like Perplexity. Perplexity is a really good solution to augmenting Google search. It's known to be really good on the internet, pretty fast. There's obviously Bing Chat. There's Claude, which comes from anthropology. But again, they're doing the same thing. Don't overcomplicate it. Pick one and teach your staff to use it and upskill them?
Well, so if I'm in a large organization and I take your advice and I say, okay, let's figure out how to data share, how folks are using this across the organization. I mean, I think that we've done this a lot in traditional management consulting of informing people how to improve process, how to go through change management, how to improve their operations, to do digital transformation, things like that. And there's almost this AI transformation that's now going to incorporate all of the above in some ways. And so how can folks such as ourselves really inform best practices in an emerging field to actually go in and talk to these folks, applying what we already know structurally? How can we help these organizations to adopt this technological change?
I think what's really exciting for like management consultants is thinking that because it's such a prevalent topic, that everyday employees are on top of it. So we did a seminar a couple months ago, this client that we've been working with for a number of years, and we spent the first 5 or 10 minutes getting into the technology side of, hey, AI sits here, and then LLMs sit under here, and like that's really interesting. And then we got to some use cases at the end of simple things like, hey, take a transcript of your meeting and throw it in ChatGPT and have it summarize. And the amount of like, that's such a good idea was kind of astounding, right? Of like, oh, I kind of assumed you had known this. It's been around a while. But again, people in their day jobs or in their outside lives, they're not looking into this. So they're doing their job as they always have, status quo. And they don't have the time to go look and search and augment their jobs. But this again, I think is a failure of the organization of not saying, hey, here's how we actually do things now. Stop taking meeting notes, right? Stop trying to, draft summary memos and just have AI do it for you. Things like that, that I just think is, again, part of the change management component, like you're saying.
And so it's almost like culturally, companies need to embrace the innovation mindset in some ways and allow employees and leadership to not be scared, honestly, but figuring out new ways that it can, like you say, augment what they're already doing. And ultimately, it can greatly impact, in a business, the bottom line, social impact. It could be the outcomes for the people that they're serving. And so I think just even getting over that initial fear on an individual level could be challenging in itself, but kind of necessary, right?
Yeah, for sure. And certainly like junior employees, like you mentioned, are the most fearful and probably give the most pushback in some ways. But again, I think it goes back to this idea of practicing the top of your license, which again, I love that phrase because it helps junior employees understand like, hey, we didn't hire you to go draft all these memos and emails and like think through like, what does the start of this paper look like? What does this white paper look like, right? We hired you for your brain.
Right.
And in order to use your brain more, we need you to do less of that. And other thing I really like is any initiative, any project, the hardest part is the first 10% and the last 10%. And what ChatGPT allows you to do is easily get 8 to 9 to 10% of the way there so you can sprint. And then the last part, it's not a ton of help with because it's a little more strategic thinking, but like jumpstart it, kick it off, right? And then let's use your brain for what we hired you for, not your fingers, and that you can type fast.
Right. I think just enabling, it could be a really empowering thing if properly adopted across an organization. You could really, from lowest level junior staff all the way up to your leadership, could just change the dynamic about how you think about that role and what success looks like in that role. And I think that could be really empowering.
Yeah, and that's something we came across time and time again as we did, different research across different companies, was the top-down approach, right? The thinking is like, the ideas of how you use this actually come from the bottom up, right? Let your junior employees go for it, right? Open up the tools, give them the different options, tell them what they do, and then let them figure out how to best use this, because every industry is going to be different. What we do at Cicero is not what's going to work at the specific client that we worked with, and vice versa. So I think once you have your junior staff or whoever is coming up with these ideas, it still comes from the top down to adopt this, and that's actually a pretty important factor we found, because again, there is some pushback or some fear by junior staff about, can we use it this way? If I tell people I'm using this, is it going to be seen as like a discounted product? And where top-down leadership can really enable that and help.
So, I mean, what are maybe some resources as, we kind of wrap this little introduction to this conversation up a little bit? What are some resources that you would maybe recommend folks can look into a little bit further to better understand?
Yeah, I mean, podcasts, because of the up-to-date nature, are the best way to stay on top of things.
Because it's moving fast.
It's moving fast.
Yeah.
Every week, I mean, there was, obviously OpenAI came out with Sora this week.
Fascinating.
Fascinating. Yeah. At the same time, Google dropped their new Gemini announcement, really strategic by OpenAI. Not many people even heard it, but essentially it's a 1 million context window, which is pretty insane, and that's actually opened up a world of things from not having to rely on what's called RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation, to actually being able to read books and textbooks and pushing that all into this Google context window that couldn't be done before, a better memory. So again, it's moving fast. There's something new every week. Podcasts are the best way. But again, if you're not passionate about it or you're not worried about staying up with the latest tech, I think just stick with ChatGPT and just continue to refine your processes, or what's called prompt engineering, to get better and better outputs. Because it's not that the model's necessarily getting better. They do make different tweaks and things that happen, but essentially you're getting better at putting inputs, or you're also starting to understand different use cases that maybe you didn't know before. And then the custom GPTs are pretty fun to play with too. There's quite a few options there.
Well, and I think talking to folks who are in this space, that where their heads are at, getting that outside expertise can also be really pretty helpful, because that's how I learn things quickest, is by talking to people who know what it is, because it is so fast. Isaac, this was a great conversation.
Hey, thanks.
Really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk more about AI, and there'll be 6 months from now a whole world of change, and so we'll have to continue the conversation because it's impactful.
6 months.
6 months.
All right.
All right.
Chase.
Thanks, Isaac.